to start on time if possible. So, if there's a couple people getting a snack yet, feel free to finish up the task there. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Steve Stern. I have been a parish pastor. My ministry began in 1967 in Le Sueur, Minnesota. Anybody know where Le Sueur is? Yeah, Jolly Green Giant? Yeah. Had this huge billboard outside Le Sueur with the Green Giant on it. And every spring, the seniors would go up there and put a diaper on the Green Giant. So this is always kind of a moment of levity there. We left Le Sueur in 1971, and we moved to Marquezan, Wisconsin. Who knows where Marquezan is? Okay, a number of you do. It's about 35 miles west of Fond du Lac. We were there for 15 years until 1986. Then we moved to Milwaukee, Wauwatosa, where we presently live on 68th. And we became a part of the staff of Wisconsin Lutheran Institutional Ministries. So I became a hospital chaplain, did some prison work also. Retired from institutional ministries in 2006. Wasn't really ready to totally retire. So Fredert had a half-time, 20-hour position. So I took that, figuring a couple of years. I'm still there. So life is kind of unexpected, isn't it? You just don't know. So I just feel very grateful to still be doing ministry after 57 years of graduating from the seminary. So I'd like to begin with a prayer this morning. Lord of the creation, when you brought the universe into existence, you created time. There was evening and there was morning, and that was the beginning of time. When we were born into this world, time began for us. We are all conscious of time. We all feel time pressure. We all have things to do. And as we enter into this Bible study, and we look at the writer of Ecclesiastes talking about time, help us to see more clearly how God wants us to use our time. May we grow in our ability to understand that and to practice it. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. About a year ago, I was looking at Ecclesiastes, and it just kind of struck me. I thought, this is really a very interesting portion of Scripture. And I just want to read this time for everything. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. There's just something so poetic about those words. And the other thing that strikes me is the contrast. All of these things are opposite of each other. The Chinese call it the yin and the yang. And isn't that really true? How our life is we're up on the heights of joy, we're down in the depths of grief. So life is filled with these contrasting things. So there were just 4 things that I chose out of all of the things that are in here that I thought would be a good thing for us to do in a Bible study. And the one is nurture, and the other one is correction. I noticed in Nudes and Notes it said connection, but it's correction. So I'm correcting Nudes and Notes. And then mourning and reconciliation. We've got 6 weeks, so my plan is that we'll spend about an hour and a half on each one of these topics. So when we get to the end of the first hour and a half, we're talking about nurture, and there's still a lot of stuff going on. I'm just going to cut it off anyway so that we can get into the next one. And then if we have time at the end, maybe we can come back to some of those things. So if you look at the outline, this is really just a framework, and it's really up to what's going on with you in the class. What are things that you are looking at, things that are happening, things that you're wondering about. So that's what's going to kind of fill in that framework that we have there. So I want to begin with the word time itself. You'll notice that, it's repetition. There's a time, there's a time, there's a time. It's kind of like the beat of a clock. And so I want to start with the phrase time is, and then you fill in the blank. And I think we all have different ideas of what time is there for. So when you hear time is, how do you complete that phrase? You got any working people here? What would they say? Yeah, Pete is doing this. And I interpret that to mean time is money, right? Time is fleeting also, yeah. So while you're making money, time is also flying by, isn't it? So a lot of people, I think, are that is really their mantra. That is kind of a driving force in their life, that time is money. And so their focus is on making money, investing money. What else can you do with money? Spending it. So all of those kind of things. That's kind of their life revolves around that. What's another phrase that maybe comes to your mind besides time is money?
Precious.
Time is precious. Yeah.
All time is a matter of what stage of life you put that question to.
Yeah, exactly. So what stage of life depends on what your view of time is. So I'm with you. Time is precious. After my embolism 4 years ago, it became more precious because I was so close to going on into eternity, but it's very precious. And I feel that every day. I just notice things more. I'm more appreciative. So maybe some of you, again, if you're more of a senior citizen, you see that more than the younger people. Mm-hmm.
Cyclical.
Time is cyclical. Okay. What does that mean?
There's nothing new under the sun.
There's nothing new. Okay. So we're kind of like we're in a washer and we're in the spin cycle. Like, hey, I've been here before. Oh, okay, there's some truth to that. Mary.
Opportunity.
Yeah, time is opportunity. I really think that's probably what the writer of Ecclesiastes is pointing to. That this time that you have been given is precious and it is an opportunity. It's a gift. And what are you going to do with that gift? So have you also, somebody was saying time is fleeting. time is wasting. How many people waste time? Okay, yeah. Yeah, we all do that too, don't we? I like to justify my wasting time by saying it's relaxing. You know, it's helping me to unwind. So maybe there's a little bit of credence to that. Sue? Time is short. And that's kind of like precious also, isn't it? I think we all have, you know, cell phones and wristwatches. And I notice, you know, and at the hospital, I keep running into doctors and nurses who are on their phones as they're walking down the hall. So that's where they're saying time is short. So they're checking their messages, they're maybe writing orders, and you know, who knows what else. Maybe they're playing video games, I don't know. But it looks very official anyway. The problem is it's dangerous because they're not looking where they're going. So I expect them to walk into an elevator shaft or something, but you know, all of those things are true. There is a time for everything. So let's now start to focus in then on these 4 things that we want to cover in the next 6 weeks. And the first one is, there is a time to plant. Okay. I'm pressing the button. Ah, there we go. Nope, we're still not going. We don't have time for this. Time for a battery change.
Take time to check the bathroom.
Yeah, yeah. Is it on slideshow or? Yeah. Okay.
I have a Mary Poppins bag I got to open.
All right, there we are. Oh, yeah. Oop, we're jumping around here. Okay. There's a time to plant. How many farmers have we got here? Well, not too many, okay. But you are looking at a corn planter, in case you wanted to know what that was. And let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It'd be an 8-row planter. I think what they've got now are probably 12, or you know, farming has really gotten big. But what time of the year is this that he is planting? In the spring, okay? Why do farmers plant in the spring?
Sprouts don't freeze and there's still time to grow into mature plants.
All right, so again, it's a matter of timing. How long does it take for a corn seed to grow until it becomes mature for harvest? Anybody know? Yeah, so you're looking at about 100 days or maybe 110, something in that area. So if you plant in May, then that means that getting into October, you're going to be ready for harvest. So it wasn't uncommon that when I was a child that we would have frost sometimes in September. And if that happened, the corn really wasn't mature yet at that point. So then, you know, that meant you didn't really get a decent crop. So again, timing is very important there. So the time to plant is when that seed will have time to mature. What other factors come in there? Why not plant in April or March? Because you could really get on the land then if you want to. Why do they wait until May?
It freezes after you plant and the crops die.
Okay, freezing. Think about germination. So what conditions do you have to have in the soil for the seed to germinate?
You have to have soft soil.
Soft soil?
And with a lot of, some water.
Okay, you've got to have moisture. It's got to be, you know, fairly soft and open. Temperature. Okay, that's very important too. So I want you to just think about this, that there's a lot involved here, isn't there, in planting? You know, the farmer doesn't just back out of the shed and go out and drop it in the ground and, okay, that's done. There's a lot of science. There's a lot of planning involved. He has to, all the conditions have to be as maximum as possible. So you want the right soil temperature, you want some moisture but not too much, you want the sun, you want enough time for that crop to mature. So all of those things are in mind. So again, you're under time pressure. You got to get that in May. And maybe you remember some years it rains every stinking day in May. And these farmers are going out of their minds because they're under that time pressure. So then they get maybe late May, early June, and then they have to change the seed to a shorter maturing variety, and you know, all those kind of things enter in. But again, all those things play in. So when I think about planting, and I think about you and me, and I think about our calling, that God has called us to be His people and to take the love that He has given to us and give that to the people around us, that's planting, isn't it? So that's really what we want to be looking at, is how do you plant love? And so again, you keep in mind what you see there. You see conditions are really important, aren't they? So I'm just going to do a little timeline thing. So a time to plant really begins when you're born, doesn't it? You really start planting love when you're born. So how do you plant love in a baby? What do moms and dads do?
Infant baptism.
All right, baptism. And when the baby's born, what's the first thing the mom probably does? Feed him, yeah, right. Because, you know, this kid is crying. And because he's hungry. Because he doesn't get anything from the womb anymore, because he's out there now. And so he's got to have something, or her, in their stomach. And so feeding becomes pretty important. So the image I always have is when the baby is born and they cut the cord, the first thing they do is give the baby to the mother. And she holds it. And then, you know, then you start getting into the nursing, if possible, and bottle feeding and all that kind of stuff. So what about Dad? What's he doing? Well, this is happening.
He works overtime.
He works overtime, yeah. That's probably true. For the first 3 children that Jean and I brought into the world, I was not there. The first one, I was teaching catechism class, and the nurse called the church and said, when are you coming? And I said, well, when class is over. So, my bad, yeah. So when I got there, I got a lot of dirty looks from the nurses because they were like, what kind of a husband are you? But finally, then they wouldn't let husbands into the delivery room. So when Jeff was born, the last one, then they allowed me to come in, but the nurse was not happy because she just knew I'd faint. And then she'd have another problem to take care of. I fooled her. I almost fainted. But to be there, how many of you have been present, you men, for the birth of your child? You have. Awesome, huh? Yeah, awesome. Just, you can't describe it. And the feelings that enter into you as you look at that miracle. And then you start to dream of, well, what is this little one going to be? But the nurture begins there with the holding and with the feeding. And a lot of times I will hear mothers just kind of crooning and goo, 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 and all that baby talk and stuff. Kind of, wow. And maybe the baby is saying, why don't you speak English? What is this gibberish? I don't understand this. I don't know. I've kind of wondered. Maybe babies know a lot more. But all of that nurture is nonverbal. I just want you to think about that. A lot of nurture can be done without words, can't it? Just again, the holding, the touching. And as the baby begins to get some vision, they can look at your face and they can see that you like them. And so they respond to that. So maybe you remember, when you first got that recognition, that they knew who you were, that they were glad to see you. So again, in the beginning, nurture doesn't have words, but it gets the message across. That little one knows they're treasured, they're valuable, they're loved. And that's a good start, isn't it? I've heard that children in orphanages oftentimes have many emotional and psychological problems because they're never touched. They are just all kind of laid out in rows, and they get the standard eating and changing and that sort of thing. But most of the time, they don't get any attention. And so as they grow up, they have lots and lots of problems because they never got that experience. All right, let's go beyond when you're an infant. And now you're into the walking and the talking. What does love look like there? What do you do with those little ones as they're running around?
Watch you so they don't get themselves into trouble.
Yeah. So love is also protective, isn't it? And so a lot of households have gates so that they don't get into where they're not supposed to get into. They have locks on the cupboards so you can't get in the cupboards. So all kinds of things. I remember we went to a baptism dinner of a member, and there was this door that went down into the basement. And my little guy, goes over, opens the door, boom, down he goes, down through. So, that was very real. And fortunately, he was pretty tough, so he didn't break anything. But he sure scared his mom and his dad. Okay, anything else that you want to put into that that toddler stage. So there's a lot of protection going on.
Spending time with them?
Spending time with them. Okay, so at that point in time, you know, you're kind of teaching them some things, don't you? How many of you read to those little ones? Yeah, yeah. Those are some of my fondest memories, I think. That little body sitting next and throwing off a ton of heat in the summertime. It was like, whew. Didn't have air conditioning, but I just love the feel of that little body. And then you got that book. And so you read the book. And it's not uncommon then that when I was just tired and I just wanted to cool out in my recliner, read. The little one comes with the book. And so, okay, fine, I got to read it. And then they could tell that I wasn't really into it, so, you know, then they would kind of like, and I got so tired of reading the same story. So then I started to change it up. And then they'd say, no, you're not reading it right. So they catch me every time. But those moments, again, were precious moments, weren't they? So you're kind of expanding their mind, they are learning things, but what's also happening is that you're strengthening the bond that you have with that child. All right, now they're off to school. What's that like? That's kind of a mixed bag, I think. You know, at first, they come home all excited, and they just jabber for hours. They're going to tell you every detail of what happened. And then what happens? You say, how was your day? And they say, you know, what did you learn? Nothing. You know, so you have all of these monosyllabic conversations. So you're trying to, you know, keep the bond going. You're trying to show that you're interested, trying to show that you care, and they're kind of like, yeah, whatever. So I'm kind of interested in that particular time where you're trying to love and the other person is sort of like, well, if you must. So what do you do with that? I just think that's a challenge. You pray, yeah. Okay, yeah. And, you know, can you force it? No, you really can't, you know, make that kid spill their guts and tell you all their ideas and their secrets. It just isn't going to happen, is it? So I think here's another aspect of planting and of nurturing. It's patience. And it's not trying to force. It's allowing that person to have that space. And well, maybe when you feel like it, you'll come and talk to me. So that was an experience I had with my youngest son in particular, that he could be very non-communicative. And then about 11 o'clock at night, when I just really had to get to bed, then he wanted to talk. And so my wife and I would be like, oh, you know, and jabber, and on and on and on. But again, it's a time thing, isn't it? So when he had something on his mind, when he had something that he wanted to kind of bring out to see what we thought about it, then that was the time when we could listen and when we could nurture. So I think, again, when we think about nurturing, it's not only an active action on our part, but it is also a patient, passive action on our part too. Sue?
Say a lot of that is just being present. in today's society, so many people are so busy that they're just not present enough for these moments to happen. And so even if you're just hanging out 90% of the time and nothing happens, you can't just say, well, this is wasted time. You know, just be there anyway, and then when the moment is there, you're there for it.
Yeah. So being present is a wonderful thing, yeah.
Very fast, because I'm busy doing something, and you come in and say something else. Well, wait till I finish this. When they want to talk, you talk then, because you don't get a second chance.
Yeah. So if you say, hold that thought, then it's going to be lost, yeah. You got to be, yeah. So, yeah, it's very similar to what my son did to us at bedtime. So, you know, those are really, really important thoughts, that idea of just being there. And I see the scene so often, well, I'll even see this when I'm out exercising. I'll see a mother out there with her child. Maybe, you know, they're walking, or maybe it's in a buggy, but she's on her cell phone. So she is not present to that child. And I saw scenes sometimes in the kitchen where, you know, you're trying to get the meal on. And so you're trying to do all of these things, and the kid is pulling on your skirt. Mommy, mommy. You know, they want your attention. So this is challenging, isn't it? And sometimes you feel yourself kind of being pulled in a dozen different ways of, okay, I want to be there, I want to have time, I want to give you love. Well, but somebody, I got all these other things to do too. So we kind of get into having to make choices and decisions. But one of my childhood memories is that my mother was always there. When I came home from school, she was always there. And it was partly a smell. I came in the house and I smelled fresh bread, just out of the oven. And you put the butter on and it melted because the bread was warm. And I knew my mom loved me because she made that bread. And I've watched her, you know, the kneading and all of that stuff that was involved there. That was a lot of work. So that's that thing about being present. I think it's really hard in the world we live in today to be present. You ever watch people in restaurants or in other settings? What's lying right there, or what's right there in their pocket? Their cell phone. And so they're trying to have a conversation with you, but got a text, got to check that, oh, got a call, hold it. And so that is not being present, is it? That is, again, being divided, being distracted, so you're not really there.
Communication is so important. I remember the nice days before TV. People talked to each other, they did things, this and that. Then TV came along, and they're all watching the screen.
Yeah.
And then now, and I thought, what could be worse? Well, now it's this.
Yeah. Yeah, so TV changed a lot of things, didn't it?
What's next?
What's next, yeah. So I think that that was the beginning of the technological revolution. And okay, with the phones now too, we know that there's more coming beyond that. You know, again, we don't know what it's going to be, but artificial intelligence is probably part of that too. So all of that does make the being present even more difficult. So it's really hard. And I think we all are so used to everything is constantly moving, you know, with technology and with computers, so you're always on. So it's really hard to stop and say, hey, how are you? Hey, what are you going through right now? Hey, I see on your face that it looks like something's happened to you. So I think in the hospital, one of the most important things that chaplains do is come in and sit down with the patient and look them in the eye. And then sometimes when you talk for an hour, they say, well, you probably have other patients to see. Well, yeah, I do. But you wanted time. And I had to give you that time. That's so important. So I think it just kind of reminds me, helps me to understand how hard this is for us to slow ourselves down, take ourselves away from all of these things that we're wired to, and just be with the person that is right there in front of us. So we should ban cell phones from restaurants, shouldn't we? So that people really do have to talk to each other over the meal. But I'm like kind of a people watcher, and how often people, they eat the whole meal and don't even really say anything to each other. What a wasted opportunity. Time to plant. All right, so we kind of been talking about kids, and especially the teenage years where they kind of want to separate from us, and that's natural. Really, we want them to grow up. We kind of use that once in a while, grow up. But on the other hand, we also want to keep the connection, don't we? All right, so now they're out of the nest. They're in school. So what's that like? How do you nurture them when they're out on their own? What do you do for them, college kids and young working people?
Phone calling on a regular basis,
Yeah.
or seeing them in person, stopping in at their house, hugging them,
Yeah. So again, you probably, call them. I know there are parents that call their kid in college every day to get them out of bed, get them to class. So that becomes the helicopter parent. And I'm not real enthused about that either, because, hey, when are they going to learn to run their schedule? So there's a difference between loving and supporting and hovering and controlling. So I think it's real important to kind of take a look at that too. Where do I fall on that scale? But that's a tense time. Yeah, go ahead.
What we've done, or what we're doing with our daughter, who's a senior in her last semester of college, is we invite her, ask her what our schedule is, invite her over for dinner, try to make sure we connect with her for church on the weekends as much as we can.
All right. So you've kind of got a line of communication going there, so that you know what's going on in her life, and you're still kind of keeping that connection going. So I've kind of had varying experiences with college kids in my family. I think my daughters were more interested in maintaining the ties. My sons were more like, like
Test.
All right, fresh batteries all around.
Okay. So I was talking about, you know, my sons especially, it was really, really hard to keep the communication going. And, you know, they could go days, weeks without saying anything about how things were going. And they were fine with that. They were like, well, what are you worried about? Yeah, I'm good. So it's kind of like, so again, that part of nurturing is you're kind of trying to figure out how much do I enter in, how much do I wait, how much do I say, how much do I kind of just keep my counsel. It's that's a very back and forth kind of thing, isn't it? Depending upon the situation. All right, well, they finally get through school, and they get into a job, they get married. So, anything more happening at that point? Are we done? I had this weird idea that when my kids turned 18, my work was done. I don't know where I got that, but I guess it was wishful thinking. So when do we stop being a parent? Never. Yeah, you never do. Yeah. So I run into 90-year-old people in the hospital who still worry about their 70-year-old children. And I'm kind of like, wow. They're not ready for the world yet, huh? They're 70 years old.
It's your role as a parent changes over the years.
Yeah, the role does change, doesn't it? Yeah. So, I mean, you know they're adults, but still, they still like to talk to you. They still like to bounce stuff off of you. And so, you know, again, nurture always matters, doesn't it? It just keeps on going with our children. And then at that point in time, who else comes on the scene?
The spouse.
Yeah, okay, but before we go there, I'm still talking about my adult children now that are married. Grandchildren, yeah. Oh my. I had classmates who had grandchildren. They were always pulling out their pictures and, you know, boring me with all the details of how cute their grandchildren were. And I just like, really? And then we had our first grandchild. And it was like, okay, yeah, woo. And so the nurture begins again. Now you can read stories to your grandchild. And you can give them candy and ice cream and then send them home. And they're all sugared up. And then your daughter's looking at you like, Dad, you didn't do that to us. And I said, I know. Because, you know, I had to raise you. But I just enjoy the grandchildren. So that's what grandchildren, our grandparents do. Okay, so now somebody said spouse. All right, so we want to go beyond the children because, again, as we look around at our relationships, many of us are married, and so we have a spouse to nurture. How do you nurture your spouse? I had a couple come into my study having some marriage strains. And the farmer said, well, you know, I mean, the cows are what really matter, you know, because that's what's making us solvent. So the money goes into the barn, you know, putting in the pipeline and all that kind of stuff. And I'm looking at his wife and I thought, oh boy, yeah. So he's taken her for granted. He's not even thinking about he couldn't run this if she wasn't doing all the things that she was doing. So he really needed to look at, how am I nurturing this woman? And then there's a guy that said to his wife, well, I told you when we got married, I love you, nothing's changed. So I don't need to repeat that. It's like, okay. So I think there's a lot of that too with couples. That when you've been married for a while, you kind of decide, don't have to make any special efforts, don't have to say any special words, don't have to let you know that what you're doing is appreciated. So, all of those things I think can kind of slip by. So a time to plant. I just think for many marriages that it just goes on, doesn't it? It never really stops. After 9/11 and after the pandemic, a lot of people started to say, I love you. And now it's almost become kind of a trite phrase. It's almost like a throwaway line. So I want you to think about real nurture. How do you make that special? How do you make that real? What could you do that would kind of catch your spouse by surprise, just to let them know that you notice, that you care? Any comments anybody has about that? Any secrets that anybody is doing? Yeah.
Take time to listen.
Take time to listen, yeah.
When they're explaining their problems throughout the day, don't always throw out a solution, just sit quietly and let them talk.
I really like that one. So listen, but don't try to fix it. Don't try to solve, because she really doesn't want a solution, does she? She just wants you to know that it's difficult, that the kids are driving her bonkers, that she's on her last nerve, that she just needs somebody to recognize that she's not just sitting there watching soap operas. So I think over the years, the culture has kind of changed too, where I think my parents, the roles were defined. My dad did the farm work. My mom did the housework. But then, actually, she was doing more. She was also doing the garden. She was also doing the chores. She was also helping out with some of the field work when an extra pair of hands was needed. And when my dad had a heart attack and he couldn't go on the tractor, Mom was out in the field. And we came home one day, and we were in Le Sueur at that time, and my dad was in the kitchen, and he had an apron on, and he was doing the dishes, because that's all that he had strength for. And he's looking out the window, and he's seeing Mom out there on the tractor, and he had that look on his face, like, oh, I'm so glad that she's doing that, but that's my tractor seat. I want to be out there. And it was just one of those little moments where, it helped. The roles were kind of reversed and changing, and Dad was seeing that and going with that. So I think for us today, there's a lot more flexibility. It's not uncommon for guys to do housework and to be more involved in childcare. So I remember in Le Sueur, Jean was in charge of the choirs. And so she said, okay, I'm going to go have choir practice. You're going to have to take care of the kids, 2 girls. And I said, well, what if their diaper has to be changed? And she's like, yeah, well, do what I do. So I prayed. I prayed that they'd wait until Mom got home. My prayer was not answered. And so again, that's where I got into the role reversal. Dads can change diapers. Dads can bathe children. So they can do, there can be back and forth going on there. But, you know, that is so important, isn't it, in terms of the nurturing that we do. We got a partnership. And that's how this is going to work. And Jean and I had such a partnership at Marquezan. She played the organ, directed the choir, and so, you know, she was on that organ bench a lot, funerals and weddings. So it was truly a partnership. And I could not have conducted that parish ministry to the extent that I did without having that assistance, without having those skills and gifts that she brought into that formula. So it's kind of different when we move down here, because now she's not the pastor's wife. We're not in a parish. And so now she gets into nursing, and she, you know, it's kind of got that going. So it just changed. We didn't have that same dynamic there. So that's another thing about nurture, is it changes with your age and with the circumstances in your life. So then you get old. So what's that like for husbands and wives? You might have some health issues. You don't know which one it's going to be. So I had mine. Jean has had her share. She's been in the hospital quite a number of times with various surgeries. And so when she was not able to do the laundry, how could I tell her I loved her? I did the laundry. Not well, I might add. But I got it in the machine, and it came out, and I hung it up, and it worked until Jean got her strength back, and then I got fired. And she got back doing the laundry the way it should be done. But there's a lot of that, isn't there? That nurture changes as the circumstances change. Any other thoughts that anybody's having about husbands and wives?
I think one thing that should not change throughout a marriage from day one until the end is telling your spouse how much you love them and showing them multiple times every day. It should just be a way of life.
Yeah. So again, that idea of spending time together as much as possible. And is there also, as we spend time together, is there also a way of caring that means having space? So I think that's kind of a combination thing. When my parents moved to town, my dad had always been outside, been on the tractor, in the fields, and now he's in the house. And he's got nothing to do. And so he thinks my mom probably needs a little advice on how to do things. So he was kind of like rearranging the cupboards. And you know, those dishes would really work better over in this cupboard. And so that went on for a couple of weeks, and my mother turned and looked at my dad, and she said, "You got to find something to do. You got to get out of the house." And so that was their moment where nurturing also meant you still have to have, you can't just be following me around. but you also have to have a life of some kind. So they lived in a town of 600 people, and the mayor job was open because nobody wanted to field all the crank calls. Their sewer was backed up and all those kind of things. So my dad took that, and he became the mayor of Sandburn, Minnesota. And he did that until the day he died. And he was happy. And he found out he was more than a farmer. He could also write grants and get money for small towns and do curb and gutter and all kinds of stuff that he got into. But he found himself in his new role in life. So nurture can also be that, isn't it? As we change and we lose abilities, we also find ourselves in new places, so we help each other to find who we are and what we want to do at that point in life. Now, all of this revolves around our family, nurturing. We're not just here to nurture our families. What we do with our children and with our spouses and with our in-laws, that's exportable, really, isn't it? That can be done with anybody. So now I want you to think about going beyond your circle, beyond your comfort zone. Who else is out there that needs some nurture? When you go to the store, yeah, go ahead.
You were talking about orphanages, someone needs to be holding these children.
Yeah.
You could go to something like that.
Yeah. You could go and hold children in an orphanage. Children's Hospital has a program for volunteers in the NIC unit, which is the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. So these are babies on ventilators who have multiple health issues. And again, the nurses are taking care of their physical, but they don't have time to hold the baby. And so one of my friends does that. She goes in and she holds those babies. So, again, that's an opportunity that is out there of volunteering in some capacity. Who else needs a lot of attention out there?
Your friends that you have, just be there for them and
Yeah.
connect with them.
Yeah.
Make sure they can talk to you when they need you.
Yeah, so friends. We all have friends. And if we take the time to, again, be with our friends, then we begin to hear what they're struggling with and what's not going so well. And then we can nurture them. So we're about at 10:15. So let's kind of hold it here, and then we'll pick it up next time. I want you to be thinking now about other people that you come into contact with outside your family circle. Let's spend some time looking at that. Any other comments before we close? All right, see you next week.